The city of Chicago lay submerged in the deep darkness of night, its streets nearly deserted, blanketed by a fierce layer of thick snow that draped over everything like a frigid curtain, swallowing every trace of life. The icy wind howled ferociously through the narrow alleys, carrying a glacial breath that pierced even the thickest coats, leaving a merciless, bone-chilling cold that seeped into the marrow. Street lights flickered weakly, casting pale light onto the slippery sidewalks, where streaks of ice and snow glimmered like forgotten tears of winter. In a hidden alley, Lucas, a homeless boy with lost eyes and frail hands, huddled against a cold brick wall, each brick seemingly soaked with his loneliness. His body trembled desperately, the thin, tattered jacket, a final keepsake from his mother, offering no protection for his frostbitten skin against the brutal chill of Chicago's winter. His stomach twisted with hunger, each cramp slicing through his empty gut like a knife, but exhaustion had drowned out every sensation. He only wanted to close his eyes, letting fragile sleep carry him away from this cruel reality. Lucas no longer remembered exactly how long he'd lived on the streets. Perhaps 3 years, since that fateful day when his mother, the only person who had ever loved him, left him forever after a violent illness. He was just 10 years old then, too young to understand why life had suddenly turned its back on him. His father had abandoned them long before, leaving Lucas and his mother in a small, run-down apartment. When she died, the landlord showed no mercy, evicting him onto the streets, and Lucas's world crumbled. The jacket he wore, a birthday gift from his mother before she weakened, was all he had left from those warm days. Now, it was just a torn rag, but he clung to it every night, as if holding on to the memory of her baked goods and her soothing lullabies. Passers-by hurried past the alley, their faces buried in scarves, their cold eyes avoiding him as if he were an invisible ghost not worth noticing. Lucas had long stopped expecting tender compassion from anyone. The indifferent stares and harsh dismissals had taught him he had no place in this world. As he prepared to close his eyes, trying to forget the numbing cold gnawing at his joints, a small figure stirred in the mysterious darkness, making his heart skip a beat. From the damp corner of the alley, a German shepherd emerged, its matted fur caked with mud, patches of ice clinging to its gaunt body like silent wounds. The dog trembled too, its thin legs shaking, clearly suffering from the same cold and hunger as Lucas. They stared at each other in silence, two lost souls abandoned by fate, meeting amidst a deadly winter. In the dog's deep brown eyes, Lucas saw a familiar sadness, a silent plea for a shred of gentle warmth amid the raging storm of life. Lucas hesitated, his frozen fingers clutching the edge of his torn jacket, the garment that once held his only memory of a home, now a threadbare scrap barely retaining any warmth. He knew what it felt like to be alone, forgotten. The endless nights sleeping under bridges, the days scavenging trash to survive, the times he was chased away like a stray animal, all had carved into him the pain of invisibility. Looking into the dog's eyes, he saw a quiet desperation, like his own in the dreams of his mother he no longer dared to recall. Slowly he reached out, his hand trembling from cold and fear, but the dog flinched back, its eyes glinting with the wariness of a creature too often hurt. Lucas didn't blame it. He too had cowered from raised hands, had learned that fierce trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. "I won't hurt you," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the cold, his white breath dissolving into the frigid air. Then, with the last of his strength, he removed his jacket, his final shield against the savage wind, ignoring the skin-searing cold that flooded his body, and gently draped it over the dog. "You need it more than I do," he said softly, his voice quivering with emotion, as if he were giving away the last piece of his past. The dog stood still, its eyes wary yet curious, as if it couldn't believe the gesture. Lucas sat down, leaning against the brick wall, the cold seeping through his remaining thin layer of clothing, making him shiver. But then, something miraculous happened. The dog slowly approached, its gaunt body pressing against him, sharing the fragile warmth between two beings struggling against death. A faint smile bloomed on Lucas's cracked lips, a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes amidst the darkness. "Guess we're both stuck in this black night, huh?" he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. The dog didn't reply, but its steady, slow breathing brought a strange comfort, like a silent promise that they were no longer alone. Lucas rested his head against the wall, his eyelids heavy, his breath sinking with the dog's. For the first time in countless lonely days, he felt an unexpected warmth, not from fire or clothing, but from the presence of a wordless friend. When the first light of morning pierced through the dense snow, Chicago began to stir, the crunch of boots on snow echoing from the rush of people heading to work. Lucas opened his eyes, his body still trembling from the cold, but an unexpected warmth pressed against him. The dog hadn't left. He looked at it, hot tears rolling down his icy cheeks. "You really stayed with me?" A tiny spark of hope flared in his heart, like a small flame in the bitter wind. "If you've got no one, and I've got no one, let's stick together, okay?" he whispered, running his hand gently over the dog's head, his trembling fingers brushing its damp but warm fur. "How about I call you Rusty?" Rusty wagged its tail lightly in the snow, as if agreeing, and Lucas smiled, his first smile in months of nothing but tears and silence. "Come on, Rusty, let's find something to eat," he said, his voice softer, as if a weight had lifted from his soul. They began the day, his steps lighter, as though the loneliness that once crushed him had eased thanks to this unexpected companion. They wandered through Chicago's bustling streets, the weak morning sunlight glinting off the snow but doing little to dispel the bone-chilling cold. The aroma of coffee and freshly baked pastries wafted from shops, teasing Lucas's hunger and making him swallow hard as he recalled distant mornings when his mother set a plate of warm pancakes before him, smiling gently and saying, "Eat up, son, so you'll grow strong." Now, that memory was just a bittersweet ache he tried to bury. He paused at a busy intersection where street performers gathered, the shrill notes of a violin and the lively beat of drums filling the air. Lucas couldn't sing or dance, but he had a small talent, drawing with charred stubs of coal and scraps of paper he scavenged from trash bins or discarded notebooks. It was the only thing he'd learned from his school days before life cast him onto the streets. Kneeling on the freezing pavement, he began sketching Rusty, its deep, loving eyes, its ears perked as if listening to the world's every sound. Rusty sat beside him, its keen eyes tracking the passers-by, its calm demeanor like that of a guardian reborn from days of wandering. Its presence drew attention. People who once ignored Lucas now stopped, captivated by the patient German shepherd at his side. An elderly woman in a thick coat paused, admiring the rough but vivid sketch of Rusty, a dog lying in the snow, its gaze telling a wordless story. She smiled kindly and dropped a few coins into the old coffee cup beside him. "Beautiful work, dear," she said, her voice warm like a hug in the winter chill. Lucas froze, his heart racing. How long had it been since he'd heard praise, since he'd felt seen by anyone? Encouraged, he drew more. Rusty curled up in the snow, passers-by with scarves fluttering in the wind, the cold yet vibrant city through his shaky charcoal lines. More people stopped, tossing coins and bills, some leaving notes on scraps of paper. "You draw so well, keep going." Rusty seemed to understand its role, wagging its tail lightly whenever someone lingered, occasionally nudging Lucas's hand with its cold nose as if to say, "You're doing great." By the time dusk fell, Lucas's hands were numb from clutching the charcoal, but the cup brimmed with coins, enough for a warm meal, something he hadn't dared dream of before Rusty. He stood, his legs stiff from the cold, and shuffled into a small corner shop. The soft yellow glow of the lights reminded him of evenings when his mother turned on the desk lamp, sitting beside him to check his homework. With his meager earnings, he bought a hot sandwich and the cheapest can of dog food. Back in the alley, he sat on the snowy ground, tore the sandwich in half, and opened the can for Rusty. "Not a grand feast, but better than the hunger we've endured," he said, a tired but genuine smile on his face. Rusty devoured its share, its eyes brightening as if sensing the pure affection from its companion. Lucas watched, silent tears falling, not from sorrow, but from a stubborn hope growing within him. "You're all I've got, Rusty," he whispered, stroking its matted fur. For the first time in years, he had a new purpose, not just surviving, but living to protect the friend who chose to stay. They settled into a simple yet meaningful routine. Each morning, Lucas and Rusty returned to their familiar intersection. He knelt on the icy pavement, sketching humble but soulful drawings, while Rusty sat beside him, proud and steady like a loyal companion, catching the eyes of passers-by. Coins clinked into the cup, not much, but enough to get by, enough for Lucas to feel he wasn't just a shadow in the crowd. He began to dream, even if only small dreams. One day, he'd save enough for a new coat or a hot meal he wouldn't have to split. But that joy wouldn't last forever. Evil always lurked in the cold heart of the city. One evening, as the streetlights flickered to life, Lucas and Rusty returned to their familiar alley, where they'd weathered so many freezing days together. The darkness shifted, and 3 figures emerged from the shadows, ragged young men with sharp, predatory eyes glinting with greed and malice. Lucas recognized them, street thugs who preyed on the weak like him. He'd seen them beat a vendor weeks ago, heard the screams of other victims in dark alleys. "Making good money, huh, kid?" one sneered, stepping closer, his breath reeking of cheap liquor and stale cigarettes. Lucas clutched his sketchbook, his heart pounding, but he forced his voice to stay steady. "I don't want trouble." "But we do," the bigger one growled, his twisted grin revealing stained teeth. He lunged, shoving Lucas against the brick wall, his head slamming into the cold surface, a sharp pain blurring his vision for a moment. "Hand it over," the third muttered, his filthy hand reaching for the pocket where Lucas kept his hard-earned coins, money he'd saved for a pair of gloves for the colder days ahead. But before he could grab it, a fierce growl erupted from the darkness. Rusty charged like a gust of wind, its strong jaws clamping onto the attacker's hand. The thug screamed in pain, staggering back as blood dripped onto the white snow, while Rusty snarled, its body tense, eyes blazing with unwavering loyalty, ready to fight to its last breath to protect Lucas. "Let go, you damn dog!" the man yelled, thrashing helplessly, his face contorted with pain and rage. The second thug raised a foot to kick Rusty, but the dog was lightning fast. It dodged, then sank its teeth into the man's calf, sending him crashing into the snow with a howl. Rusty's barks echoed through the alley, fierce and unrelenting, a declaration that it wouldn't let anyone harm Lucas. Despite his terror, Lucas saw his chance. He gripped his sketchbook and swung it hard into the third thug's face, making him curse and stumble back, clutching his stinging nose. The bitten thug, blood pouring from his hand, grabbed a rusty metal pipe nearby, his eyes wild with fury. "Stupid mutt!" he roared, raising it high with a crazed glare. Lucas's heart seized in horror. Rusty didn't back down, its eyes fierce with resolve, ready to sacrifice itself for him despite its frail, trembling body. The pipe swung down, aimed at Rusty's side. Lucas screamed, "No!" his voice breaking in the frigid air, his body lunging forward without thought, as if he could shield Rusty with himself. But Rusty was faster. It dodged, then leapt, sinking its teeth into the thug's wrist. The man shrieked, the pipe clattering onto the snow with a harsh clang, rolling across the ice. Rusty held firm, its low growls unwavering, its weary legs shaking but refusing to let go, as if the world could collapse and it would still stand for Lucas. Lucas scrambled to his feet, his trembling hands snatching the pipe before the thug could recover, standing tall despite his heart pounding like it might burst. Then, a distant police siren pierced the night. Someone nearby, perhaps a rare passerby with a shred of compassion, had heard the commotion and called for help. The thugs panicked, their faces paling under the flickering streetlights. "Let's go!" one shouted, and in an instant they fled into the darkness, their curses fading into the howling wind. Lucas collapsed onto the snow, gasping for breath, his hands clutching his face to hold back the tears threatening to spill. Rusty limped toward him, blood seeping from a gash on its side. A glancing blow from the pipe had torn through its golden fur, but it still licked his cheek, its warm brown eyes saying, "You're safe now." Lucas's tears broke free, hot against his frozen cheeks, streaming down his chin. "You saved me, Rusty," he choked out, pulling the dog into his arms, feeling its faint warmth. "You really saved me." But then he noticed. The blood staining Rusty's fur was dark and thick, the wound bleeding steadily, its body shuddering with each breath. It was badly hurt. Panic surged through Lucas, his shaking hands running over Rusty's fur, feeling the warmth of fresh blood on his fingers. "No, you can't leave me," he whispered, his voice breaking in desperation at the thought of losing the only friend he had, the one who'd given him a reason to keep going through each freezing day. As the deep darkness seemed to swallow all hope, a gentle yet firm voice cut through. "Are you all right, dear?" Lucas startled and turned to see an elderly woman with silver hair standing at the alley's entrance, her sharp but compassionate eyes gazing down at Rusty. She wore a thick coat, her frail hands clutching a small bag, her demeanor calm amidst the chaos. Under the dim street light, Lucas realized she wasn't a stranger. He'd seen her a few times near the intersection, carrying food for the neighborhood stray cats. "I saw everything," she said, her voice warm like a spring breeze in the dead of winter. "Your dog fought for you like a hero." Lucas stepped in front of Rusty, his protective instincts flaring, but the woman knelt slowly, extending her hand with the gentleness of someone seasoned by life. Rusty, though in pain, didn't growl or shy away. It only sighed weakly, resting its head on the snow as if accepting help. "I'm Eleanor Dawson," she introduced herself. "I used to train search and rescue dogs. I can help him." She pulled a small first aid kit from her bag, her skilled hands wiping blood from Rusty's fur and bandaging him with the care one might give a child. Lucas watched, silent tears falling. For the first time in years, someone cared about him, about Rusty. "I don't have money," he whispered, his voice hoarse with shame and fear, dreading that this kindness, like so many before, would vanish. Eleanor smiled softly, her eyes shining like a lantern in the night. "I don't need money, dear. I just want to save your friend." She briefly explained that she'd worked with rescue dogs for 2 decades, witnessing them save lives in the direst situations, and now she couldn't stand by as a dog like Rusty suffered. When she finished, she stood and looked at Lucas. "Come with me. I have a warm place for both of you." Lucas glanced at Rusty, seeing a faint spark of hope in its eyes, then at Eleanor, the unexpected kindness in her gaze like a flame warming his heart. He took a deep breath and nodded shakily. "Yes, ma'am." They left the frigid alley, following Eleanor through the dim streets, away from what had once been his nightmare. Lucas remained tense, unsure if trusting her was wise, but Rusty walked beside her without hesitation, as if sensing something he couldn't yet see. After a few blocks, they reached a small but cozy house, its porch light casting a warm glow over the snow like a beacon in a raging storm. Inside, the scent of burning wood from the fireplace mingled with the faint aroma of coffee, filling the space and stirring memories of long-gone evenings when his mother was alive, when their little home rang with laughter. Rusty, exhausted from the night, curled up on an old rug by the sofa, its tail tapping weakly against the floor in silent gratitude. Eleanor draped a thick blanket over Lucas, her voice gentle. "Rest, dear. Tomorrow, we'll take Rusty to a vet. He needs proper care." Lucas hesitated. The thought of Rusty leaving his side, even briefly, unsettled him, as if he might lose him forever. But Eleanor's earnest eyes, her selfless concern, made him nod. "Okay." As Eleanor rebandaged Rusty's wound, she asked, "How long have you been out there?" Lucas lowered his head, his voice small, as if afraid someone might overhear. 3 years since my mom died, when I was 10. He added more, his voice catching, about his mother, the illness that took her, the days he wandered with only her jacket to his name. Eleanor paused, her eyes brimming with deep empathy, but she didn't press further. She understood pain didn't need words. "You've got a gift with animals," she said warmly. "Not everyone has that." Lucas blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I trained rescue dogs for 20 years, Eleanor said with a faint smile, glancing at Rusty sleeping peacefully. "You and him have a sacred bond. He'd do anything for you, and I can see you would for him too." Lucas looked at Rusty, tears welling again. He remembered the freezing nights warmed only by Rusty, its fierce barks as it protected him. "Did I save him, or did he save me?" he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. The next morning, Lucas woke to unexpected warmth, no longer the brutal cold or the howling wind of the alley. He lay on a soft sofa, wrapped in a blanket, Rusty sleeping beside him, its steady breaths like a lullaby. The smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread wafted from the kitchen, rousing a hunger he tried to ignore for days. "Good morning," Eleanor called, setting a plate of hot toast in front of him. "Eat up, you need strength." Lucas hesitated, but Rusty stirred, nudging his hand as if encouraging him. He took a bite, silent tears falling as the warmth spread through him. For the first time in 3 years, he ate a proper breakfast, not scraps from a dumpster. Afterward, Eleanor grabbed her coat. "Let's go, time to take Rusty to the vet." At the clinic, the vet raised an eyebrow. "Has he been trained?" "He's very obedient." Lucas smiled, shaking his head. "He just understands me." On the way back, Eleanor shared more about her life, days working with rescue dogs, times they found missing people in blizzards or landslides. "But I'm old now," she said. "I just want to help creatures like Rusty find a home." Then she asked, "Lucas, have you thought about working with dogs?" He blinked, caught off guard. "I don't know, I see talent in you," she continued, her voice firm. "I could teach you to train dogs, give them purpose, like Rusty gave you purpose." Lucas glanced at Rusty walking beside him, its ears perked despite its healing wound. For the first time, he was offered a radiant future, not just survival, but meaning. "I'd like to learn," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Eleanor nodded. "Then let's start." That day, Lucas's life changed, not because he was saved, but because he found a sacred mission with Rusty. Under Eleanor's guidance, he learned to train dogs, understanding them with his heart. Rusty, once a stray, became a rescue dog, fiercely loyal, and they trained together in Eleanor's backyard, cold mornings filled with laughter. Eleanor didn't just teach him techniques, she shared stories of dogs' loyalty, how they could heal wounds humans couldn't see. One day, she took Lucas to the local animal rescue center. "This is Lucas," she introduced. "He's got a knack for working with dogs." The manager, impressed by Rusty and Eleanor's word, gave Lucas a chance, a small job at first, caring for abandoned dogs. Time passed, and Lucas didn't just learn to train dogs, he learned to trust, to open his heart. He and Rusty became a team. Rusty searched for items Eleanor hid in the snow for practice, while Lucas took notes, smiling each time Rusty succeeded. A year later, Lucas was no longer the boy shivering in an alley. He had a small room in Eleanor's house, a real skill, and a sacred purpose, working at the rescue center, training dogs to help others, as Rusty had helped him. One evening, sitting with Rusty on the porch watching the sunset,